CEO Millionaire saw his 5-year-old little daughter cleaning tables at his wedding. Before starting to watch this story, tell us in comment section from which city you're watching this story. Let's enjoy this story. The sun had barely dipped beneath the Los Angeles skyline when the buzz outside the Crystal Horizon banquet hall reached its peak. Parked Rolls-Royces, stretched black limousines, and clusters of paparazzi told the city one thing. Someone very rich and very powerful was getting married tonight. Inside the hall, a sea of white roses and golden chandeliers dazzled under warm lights. The floor shimmered with reflections from the overhead crystal pieces, and soft violin music floated through the air like perfume. Every detail had been curated to perfection. $800 per head dining, hand-picked orchids from Amsterdam, and a 3-tier cake designed by a celebrity chef flown in from New York. At the heart of it all stood Ethan Hayes, the 38-year-old CEO of Hayes Tech, a rapidly rising Silicon Valley software empire. Ethan had climbed the ladder of success faster than anyone expected. He went from a modest life in Modesto to a multi-billion-dollar valuation in under 10 years. From magazine covers to TED Talks, he had become a symbol of genius and ambition. Now, dressed in a designer tuxedo with a diamond-studded watch peeking from his cuff, he was marrying Selena Monroe, a runway model-turned-influencer with over 30 million followers across platforms. She wore a custom Vera Wang gown that took 6 months to stitch and over $100,000 to complete. Everything about the evening screamed perfection. Waiters moved swiftly, serving miniature dishes that looked more like artwork than food. Champagne flutes clinked as business giants, actors, and politicians mingled under one roof. Everyone was laughing, celebrating, posting Instagram stories, soaking in the extravagance. But amid all the noise, no one noticed a tiny figure standing quietly near the back of the hall. Her name was Aria Hayes. Only 5 years old, she wore a sky-blue dress her late mother had bought her before cancer took her away 2 years ago. Her dark curls were a little messy, her tiny shoes scuffed from hours of walking, and her eyes, wide, curious and searching, scanned the unfamiliar crowd for a familiar face. No one had told Aria this was her father's wedding until the morning. The nanny had dressed her up in a rush, explaining they had to go somewhere special. She hadn't seen Ethan in almost 3 months. He was always traveling, always in meetings, or attending important events. And now here she was, watching her father holding someone else's hand, smiling for the cameras. She stayed in the corner, unsure where to go. Everyone was busy. The new bride glanced at her once with a forced smile and quickly turned away. Aria didn't fully understand what was happening, but she could feel something was off. She wasn't wanted. As the night grew louder, Aria noticed empty glasses and napkins on the tables. She remembered how her mother used to clean tables at a local cafe in Modesto, and how she'd sometimes let Aria help. Wanting to be useful and maybe noticed, Aria picked up a napkin from one table and started gently wiping the surface. She moved to another table, then another, quietly, seriously, like it was her job. Guests thought she was part of some act, maybe a child performer in costume. A few even chuckled and took pictures. No one stepped forward to ask who she was or why she was cleaning. It wasn't until one of the photographers, hired from a media agency in San Francisco, zoomed in on her tiny hands wiping a wine stain from a marble table that things changed. He clicked a photo, more out of curiosity than intent, but when he saw it on his screen, something about the image hit him. This little girl, cleaning tables at one of the most expensive weddings the city had seen, wasn't part of the celebration. She was a ghost within it. Back near the grand stage, Ethan was shaking hands with a senator from Nevada when the photographer approached one of the event managers. "Who's that kid?" he asked. The manager, clueless, started checking the guest list. Nobody had registered a child with that name. When they finally followed the photographer's finger toward the tables, Ethan glanced in that direction and froze. His heart sank. He knew that blue dress. He remembered buying it with his wife, Nora, from a discount store during better, simpler times. Aria wasn't supposed to be here, not in this way. Ethan hadn't even introduced her to Selena properly. He thought he'd deal with it after the wedding. Now, there she was, wiping down tables while hundreds of eyes danced around her without truly seeing her. For a man who had built a billion-dollar company from code, who negotiated million-dollar deals daily, the sight of his daughter doing what looked like janitorial work at his own wedding sliced through his chest like a knife. The music kept playing. The influencers kept filming. Selena was too busy adjusting her veil to notice. But Ethan couldn't move. For the first time in years he felt like an imposter. All the luxury in the room turned meaningless in a blink. That tiny lonely girl was his. And she wasn't smiling. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. Ethan Hayes didn't remember walking off the stage. One moment he was surrounded by applause and cameras, and the next he was pushing past servers and guests with no regard for how out of place he looked. His polished shoes echoed sharply against the marble floor as he moved across the glittering ballroom toward the small figure still busy wiping a table with her soft, chubby hands. Arya didn't see him at first. She had moved on to another table, lifting half-empty glasses with both hands and placing them carefully into a tray nearby. It wasn't even clear where she had gotten the tray from. She was small, delicate, and completely out of place in a world built for adults with plastic smiles and diamond watches. Ethan stood a few feet away, heart hammering. His throat dried up as he saw a drop of juice spill over her hand and watched her instinctively look for a napkin, on her own. The simplicity of her movements broke something inside him. This was his child. His flesh and blood. And he had let her become invisible in a hall full of people who had no idea who she was. He stepped forward slowly and knelt down beside her. "Arya," he said barely above a whisper. She looked up, blinking at him, eyes unsure. For a second she didn't recognize him. He hadn't been around enough. She tilted her head the way she always did when she was confused, then finally whispered back, "Daddy?" Ethan nodded. His lips trembled, but he forced a smile. She gave a shy one in return. "Are you working?" he asked gently. Arya looked down at her hands and shrugged. "Nobody told me what to do. I just didn't want the place to be dirty." She was 5 and all she wanted was to be helpful. Ethan looked around, guests chatting, waiters bustling, his new wife laughing with a designer from Miami, and realized not a single person had thought to care for his daughter. Not even him. He lifted her into his arms, holding her close. She smelled faintly of baby shampoo and something else, loneliness. She rested her head on his shoulder as if unsure whether she was allowed to. He whispered, "I'm so sorry," though she likely didn't understand the full meaning of it. A server passed by and glanced awkwardly at the scene but said nothing. Ethan stood up, still holding Arya, and began walking toward the back of the hall where the dressing rooms were. The hall buzzed on, uninterrupted, as if the father-daughter moment was a glitch in the celebration. Inside the green room, Ethan set her down on a couch and knelt again. "Did you eat anything?" Arya shook her head. "No one gave me a plate. And I was scared to ask." Ethan stared at her and swallowed hard. He realized she didn't know how to demand attention because she'd learned to expect absence. He pulled out his phone and texted his assistant, "Bring food. For a child. Now." Then he looked back at Arya and said, "I'll make this right." She gave a half nod, still unsure what to say. She'd spent more time with nannies than with her own father. Nora, her mother, had held the family together while Ethan was building his empire. And after her death, he'd promised to be both parents. But soon enough, conference rooms and private jets had swallowed his intentions. His assistant brought in a small plate, grilled cheese, apple slices, a tiny cup of mac and cheese. Arya lit up and began eating. Ethan sat beside her, watching her quietly. He had no idea if he was allowed to cry at his own wedding, but the lump in his throat didn't care about etiquette. After a few bites, she looked up. "Who's the lady in the white dress?" The question hit like a stone. Ethan cleared his throat and said, "Her name is Selena. We just got married." Arya stopped chewing for a moment, processing the information. "Is she going to be my new mommy?" she asked. Ethan didn't have an answer. He hadn't thought about how Selena would fit into Arya's life, or if she wanted to. The wedding had been more of a public event than a personal one. It hadn't crossed his mind that the most important person in his life wasn't involved in any of it. He shook his head gently. "I don't know yet, sweetie. But what I do know is you're the most important person in my world, and I'm sorry I haven't shown you that enough." She blinked at him. "It's okay," she said, then looked back at her plate. The forgiveness in her voice only deepened the guilt. As she ate, Ethan sat back, staring at the mirror across from them. The reflection showed a man in a tuxedo with tears threatening to fall, sitting next to a child who never asked for anything but presents. He had built skyscrapers in Silicon Valley but had failed to build a relationship that truly mattered. Back in the ballroom, Selena was starting to notice her groom had vanished. She sent a message to his assistant asking where Ethan was. The assistant, who had watched the interaction in the green room, didn't respond immediately. When he finally did, he simply wrote, "He's with his daughter. Give them time." That message told Selena more than a paragraph ever could. She stood quietly, lips tightening. For the first time, she realized she might not be marrying the man she thought she was. Ethan looked at Arya, who was now smiling and telling him about her favorite stuffed bunny at home. He nodded along, asking questions, making silly faces. He didn't care if he missed the toast or the first dance. For the first time he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. Ethan didn't return to the wedding hall for another hour. By the time he did, most of the guests were too drunk, too distracted, or too polite to ask where he had been. The string lights twinkled across the ceiling of the Charleston venue, and the air still carried the scent of champagne and roses, but to Ethan it all felt hollow. His mind was replaying every second of the last hour with Aria. He hadn't realized how much of her childhood had passed in the rearview mirror while he chased deals and board approvals. Selena spotted him near the back of the room and walked up with a slow, deliberate pace. Her smile was tight, controlled, and visibly strained. "You disappeared," she said, holding her voice just above a whisper. "People noticed." Ethan offered a tired smile. "I was with Aria. She was cleaning tables, Selena." No one noticed her. Selena's expression didn't soften. Instead, she took a slow breath and responded, "You could have told me." Ethan nodded. "I didn't plan to vanish. But seeing her like that, I couldn't breathe." The conversation ended there. There wasn't much left to say that wouldn't crack something open. They walked back to the center of the hall and joined the guests for the final photos, the cake cutting, and the staged laughter. But something had shifted. Selena could sense it. Ethan wasn't there, not really. And later, in the hotel suite where the newlyweds were supposed to spend their first night, that shift turned into a quiet tension. Selena took off her earrings slowly and placed them on the dresser while Ethan sat by the window with a glass of untouched whiskey. "I didn't marry you to compete with a child," she said flatly. Ethan turned. "She's not just a child. She's my daughter." Selena didn't flinch. "I know. But I also know I didn't sign up to be sidelined on my own wedding night." Ethan stood, setting the glass down. "Then maybe you signed up for the wrong man." The silence between them was sharp. It was the kind of silence that didn't require yelling to be loud. Selena exhaled, took off her heels, and disappeared into the bathroom without another word. Ethan, still in his tuxedo, sat back down and picked up his phone. There was a photo of Aria saved as his lock screen, taken over a year ago at a zoo in San Diego. She was holding a melting popsicle and laughing at a llama. He stared at it for a long time. The next morning, instead of going straight to the scheduled post-wedding brunch, Ethan drove to the small house where Aria had been staying with his sister, Lydia, who had flown in from Seattle to help with the wedding. The neighborhood was quiet, full of modest two-story homes with tiny yards and mailboxes that leaned just a little from age. Lydia opened the door in her robe, eyebrows lifting. "Didn't expect to see you here," she said, stepping aside. Aria, still in her pajamas, was playing with toy blocks on the living room carpet. When she saw her father, she ran up and wrapped her arms around his legs. He knelt, hugged her tight, and whispered, "Can I hang out with you today?" She nodded against his chest. Lydia folded her arms, watching. "What happened?" Ethan looked at his sister. "Everything. And nothing. I've been missing the most important parts of her life, Elwedi." They spent the day together, just the two of them. They went to a small local diner for pancakes and chocolate milk. Ethan didn't check his phone once. Then they went to a park in downtown Charleston where Aria insisted on trying every swing, every slide, every spinning contraption until she was breathless and giggling. For the first time in a long time, Ethan didn't feel like a CEO. He felt like a dad. And it felt better than any award, any applause, any first-class flight. Meanwhile, Selena waited at the brunch venue for over an hour before leaving. Her calls to Ethan went unanswered. Her texts were short and increasingly cold. She had planned for a life of influence and luxury, but she hadn't expected to share it with a 5-year-old who commanded more of Ethan's heart than she ever could. By the end of the day, she checked into a separate suite and made arrangements to return to Los Angeles the next morning. Later that night, Ethan put Aria to bed at Lydia's house and stayed to watch her sleep. Her hand was clutching a tiny stuffed bear, and her breathing was soft, steady. Lydia sat beside him on the couch. "You've got a tough road ahead," she said. "Especially if you want to be in her life for real this time." Ethan nodded. "I'm selling the company," he said suddenly. Lydia blinked. "You're what?" "I've already made more money than I can spend in 3 lifetimes. But I only have one of these," he said, pointing toward the bedroom. "And she deserves better than a father who shows up in headlines but never at home." Lydia didn't argue. She just nodded, watching her brother for a moment longer. "Then make it count. Every minute. Every day." Ethan leaned back and let the silence fill the room. It wasn't the ending he had expected to his wedding weekend. But maybe it was the beginning of something far more important. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. Ethan sat in the corner of the coffee shop on King Street in Charleston, watching people come and go through the window, a half-empty latte cooling in front of him. The buzz of life continued outside like nothing had changed, but inside him, everything had. It had been 4 days since the wedding, and Selena hadn't called again. Her last message had been a single sentence: "We're clearly not on the same page." Ethan hadn't responded. Not because he didn't care, but because he couldn't pretend anymore. Every time he tried to picture the future Selena had planned for them, gala dinners, yacht parties, luxury real estate, it all blurred around the face of his daughter standing alone with a rag in her hand, wiping tables at the most expensive wedding Charleston had seen that season. Ethan knew he could never unsee that. He pulled out his phone and dialed the number of his company's lead board member, Russell Green. Russell had been with him since the early days, back when they ran the startup from a one-bedroom apartment in Austin. After a few rings, Russell picked up. "Ethan," he said cautiously, "wasn't expecting to hear from you this week." Ethan cleared his throat. "I'm stepping down. Effective immediately." Russell was quiet for a beat. "You sure about this?" "I've never been more sure. I'll transfer transitional authority to you and Maureen. I'll work with the legal team to ensure everything's clean. But I'm done, Russ. I need to be a father now." There was no anger on the other end, just a long exhale and then, "I respect that. We'll talk more tomorrow." Later that evening, Ethan took Arya to Waterfront Park, letting her chase the pigeons and throw pieces of bread into the fountain while he sat on a bench and watched. Lydia joined them holding 2 hot chocolates. She handed one to Ethan and sat down beside him. "So, you really quit?" she asked without surprise. "I did," he said. "Everything's shifting, LYD. I've spent the last 10 years building an empire that never smiled back at me. My daughter smiles. That's all I want to see now." Lydia sipped her drink, watching Arya squeal with delight. "You think Selena's going to be okay with that?" "She's already gone," Ethan said. "I think we both knew she wasn't signing up for this version of me." Lydia nodded slowly, then added, "You know it's not going to be easy, right? The press is going to dig into this. Millionaire CEO walks away after child spotted working at his wedding. That kind of thing spreads fast." Ethan didn't flinch. "Let them talk. I'd rather be the headline for walking toward my daughter than for another corporate milestone." By the next morning, the story had already begun to trickle into gossip blogs. One photo of Arya holding a dish towel had somehow made it online, paired with speculative headlines about what had gone wrong at the wedding. Ethan's phone buzzed nonstop, but he ignored the calls. He had bigger plans now. He pulled Arya into his lap at breakfast and looked her in the eyes. "What would you say if Daddy took you somewhere new? Somewhere just for us?" Arya blinked up at him, a spoonful of cereal halfway to her mouth. "Like Disney?" He laughed. "Maybe. But I was thinking somewhere to live. A new home. Just us. Would you like that?" She nodded without hesitation. "Can we have a puppy too?" Ethan smiled. "Absolutely." 3 days later, they were on a flight to Asheville, North Carolina, a town Ethan had always loved for its quiet charm, nature trails, and slower pace. He'd visited once for a retreat and remembered thinking it was the kind of place you could breathe in without choking on ambition. They checked into a short-term rental while Ethan explored schools and houses. He had already hired a private tutor to catch Arya up on the schooling she'd missed during the chaos of the past year. He wanted structure, but not the suffocating kind. In Asheville, people didn't recognize him. No one cared about billion-dollar valuations or IPOs. He wore jeans and sneakers to the grocery store and nobody whispered or snapped pictures. Arya started riding her scooter on the driveway of their new rental, and every evening they baked cookies together before bedtime. Sometimes they watched cartoons. Other nights, she fell asleep in his arms while he read aloud from storybooks. Ethan started to write again too, not press releases or shareholder updates but a private journal. He poured into it everything he had never said out loud: his guilt, his regrets, his hope for a second chance. Back in Charleston, the buzz died down quickly. Selena posted cryptic Instagram captions about new chapters and inner peace, but the tabloids stopped caring after a week. Russell took over as interim CEO and issued a short statement confirming Ethan's departure as a personal choice. Investors grumbled but moved on. Ethan, for the first time in over a decade, didn't care about quarterly losses or media spin. Then one afternoon, while watching Arya nap on the couch wrapped in her favorite unicorn blanket, Ethan got a call from an unfamiliar number. He hesitated, then answered. "Mr. Bennett?" said a soft voice. "This is Rachel Clark. I'm a counselor at Asheville Community Center. Your name came up when I was working with another single father, and he mentioned how you'd walked away from your company for your daughter." I just wanted to say, it matters. It inspires people. And, if you ever want to volunteer with our mentorship program, I think you'd be perfect. Ethan stared out the window at the quiet trees swaying in the afternoon breeze. I'd love to, he said after a pause. Thank you for reaching out. He hung up and looked over at Arya. She stirred slightly, then sighed in her sleep. Ethan smiled. His past had been built on power and strategy. But his future, this life, would be built on presence. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. Ethan adjusted the collar of his flannel shirt as he stood outside the Asheville Community Center, waiting for his first mentorship session. It had been 2 weeks since Rachel Clark had called him, and though he had accepted without hesitation, now that he was here, uncertainty tugged at him. What could a man who had spent the better part of his life chasing boardroom wins offer to kids growing up in broken homes or struggling neighborhoods? He glanced down at his hands, no longer manicured and polished like when he was a CEO, but rougher now, more familiar with playground swings and grocery bags. Maybe that was enough. Inside, the community center buzzed with quiet life. Kids were playing table tennis, some sat with tutors doing homework, and others lounged around the small library corner, flipping through old comic books. Rachel waved at him from behind the front desk. He's in room B, she said. Name's Jalen. 13. Smart but doesn't trust easily. Lost his dad a year ago. Ethan nodded, took a deep breath and walked in. Jalen sat with arms folded, backpack still on, eyes fixed on the floor. Ethan sat across from him and waited. After a moment he said, "When I was your age I got suspended for throwing a calculator at my math teacher. He told me I'd never be anything." Jalen glanced up. "Did you throw it hard?" Ethan chuckled. "Hard enough to crack his desk." That pulled the faintest smirk from Jalen, and that's where it started. Every Thursday afternoon Ethan met with Jalen. At first they talked about video games and sneakers. Slowly, it shifted to deeper things: missing fathers, school fights, the pressure to act tough. Ethan never lectured. He just listened. Sometimes that was all Jalen needed. One day, after a particularly quiet session, Jalen muttered, "I heard about you. You used to be rich." Ethan smiled. "I still am. Just in a different way now." Jalen frowned. "You don't miss it? The cars? The houses?" Ethan thought for a moment. "Sometimes. But I missed my daughter more. And I'll never miss her again." Meanwhile, Arya had adjusted beautifully to life in Asheville. Her tutor, Megan, said she was bright and curious, though sometimes too quiet. Ethan suspected she still remembered the wedding night, and maybe the feeling of being invisible in a crowd of adults. He tried his best every day to erase that from her memory, not by pretending it didn't happen, but by replacing it with moments that felt the opposite. Pancake Sundays. Surprise picnics. Bedtime stories with silly voices. Once, while driving home from the park, she whispered from the back seat, "I like this life, Daddy. It's not fancy but it's cozy." Ethan blinked back tears, nodded and said, "Me too, sweetheart." As winter approached, Ethan found himself growing more rooted in the community. He joined a local dad's hiking group, volunteered at soup kitchens on Saturdays, and even taught a workshop at the library on building a business from scratch. It wasn't about reclaiming prestige, it was about offering something real. One evening, as he closed the dishwasher in his small kitchen, the phone rang. It was Lydia. "You need to see this," she said and texted him a link. It was an article on a popular business site, "Why One CEO Walked Away from Everything, and What We Can Learn from Him." There were photos from his Charleston days side by side with new ones someone had taken at the community center. Ethan in jeans, high-fiving kids, Arya on his shoulders at a fall fair. The story had gone viral. Ethan sighed. "I didn't want attention." Lydia replied, "You didn't ask for it. But maybe the world needed to see someone choose family for once." The next few days were a whirlwind. News outlets called, podcasts requested interviews, and one publishing house even pitched the idea of a memoir. Ethan declined all of it. He wasn't looking to turn his new life into a brand. But he did agree to one local interview with a small Asheville newspaper. When the reporter asked what had made him change course, Ethan said, "I saw my daughter cleaning tables at a wedding I thought was supposed to celebrate love. That was the moment I realized I'd lost the plot." Jalen began doing better in school. His teachers noticed. Rachel noticed. And one day Jalen's mom, a tired-looking nurse named Denise, approached Ethan at the center. "I don't know what you said to him," she said, "but thank you. He talks about you like you're a superhero." Ethan shook his head. "I'm no hero. Just someone who made a lot of mistakes and is trying not to repeat them." One Friday night, as Arya fell asleep beside him on the couch with an old Winnie the Pooh book open across her chest, Ethan stared at the ceiling. Life was slower now. Quieter. There were no jets waiting on runways, no red carpets or shareholder meetings. But there was peace. There was meaning. And there was a little girl who no longer had to wipe tables to be seen. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. Winter rolled in slowly over Asheville, the trees shedding their last golden leaves as frost began to settle along the sidewalks each morning. Ethan found comfort in the rhythm of the seasons, something he had never paid attention to during his years in Charleston, where his time had been measured in quarters, earnings reports, and acquisitions. Now, his time was divided between school pickups, tutoring sessions, volunteer work, and simple meals made in a modest kitchen with chipped countertops and warm yellow lights. Arya had taken to drawing pictures of the two of them, always holding hands, always smiling. Sometimes she'd draw their small house, sometimes the community center. Once, she drew a picture of Ethan standing on a stage holding a trophy. When he asked about it, she replied, "Because you're my hero, and heroes always get trophies." He laughed and told her a hug from her was better than any trophy. She didn't argue. One cold Saturday morning, Ethan got a call from someone he hadn't spoken to in years. Tom Wheeler, a former colleague who had been his CFO back when Ethan ran Solistech. "Heard about you through that article," Tom said. "Didn't believe it at first. Thought maybe you'd gone off the grid or something." Ethan smiled. "I guess I sort of did. Just not in the way people expect." Tom paused, then added, "We're launching something new. Sustainable energy, vertical farming, real future stuff. I know you've walked away, but this could use your brain. Even just a few meetings." Ethan hesitated. Part of him was curious. He still felt that old thrill in his veins when business talk sparked up. But then he looked over at Arya, curled up on the couch in her pajamas watching cartoons. "Let me think about it," he said, and meant it. That evening, Ethan met with Rachel at a nearby cafe. She had become more than just the community center manager. She was his friend now, someone who understood the quiet ache of change. Over steaming mugs of hot chocolate, he told her about Tom's offer. "It's tempting," he admitted. "But I don't know if I trust myself in that world anymore. It took so much from me the first time." Rachel studied him. "It didn't take, it revealed. The world you were in showed you what mattered. And you made the choice. Just remember, walking away once doesn't mean you have to walk away forever. Sometimes we go back stronger. Wiser." A few days later, Jalen approached him with a crumpled flyer. "School's doing a mentorship showcase," he said, eyes wide with hope. "They asked if I could present our sessions. Like, talk about what I learned and stuff. But only if my mentor agrees to come." Ethan blinked. "You want me to go up there with you?" Jalen nodded. "I want them to see what I see." Ethan ruffled the boy's hair. "Then I'll be there." The day of the showcase arrived with icy rain tapping against the windows of the high school auditorium. Ethan wore his only good sweater and a pair of boots that still had salt marks from last winter. When they called Jalen's name, the boy strode up confidently, glanced back to make sure Ethan was still in the front row, then began speaking. "When I met Mr. Ethan, I didn't trust people. Especially adults. But he didn't ask me to talk. He just listened. He told me stories, made me laugh, and reminded me I'm not stuck where I started. He's not just my mentor. He's proof that people can change. That I can change too." Ethan sat frozen, heart swelling with emotion he hadn't felt even during the biggest moments of his career. After the presentation, a young teacher approached him. "Would you consider talking to some of our other students? Maybe even do a workshop on career paths?" Ethan didn't say yes right away, but something inside him shifted. Maybe it was time to find a middle ground, a way to share his past without returning to it, to teach from experience rather than drown in it. That night, after tucking Arya in, Ethan sat at his desk and opened his laptop for the first time in weeks. Not for stock prices or press releases, but to jot down ideas. Notes for a talk, thoughts on mentorship, and how to help teenagers understand success beyond dollar signs. He wasn't trying to start a business. He was trying to start a ripple. The next few weeks blurred with new energy. Ethan began speaking at local schools, community events, even small conferences. His story wasn't flashy, but it was honest. He talked about the moment he saw his daughter wiping tables and how that image changed everything. Audiences didn't need charts and stats. They needed truth. And he gave it to them. Not every room clapped, and not every room understood, but enough did to keep him going. One evening, as he was finishing dinner with Arya, she said, "Daddy, you look happy when you help those big kids." Ethan looked up. "I guess I am." She reached over and patted his hand like an old friend. "Then you should keep doing it. I don't mind sharing you. That made Ethan laugh, deeply and genuinely. She didn't understand the gravity of her words, but he did. He was no longer choosing between being a father and being a contributor. He had finally found a way to be both. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. The first snow of the season blanketed Asheville in a quiet hush that December morning. Arya pressed her face to the window, watching snowflakes float down like feathers. Can we go outside, Daddy? Please? Ethan smiled as he sipped his coffee. Only if you bundle up like a marshmallow. She laughed and ran to find her mittens. Life had taken on a new kind of joy, simple, unfiltered, and deeply real. 4 months, Ethan had been balancing his talks at local schools, his mentoring at the community center, and his most important role, being Arya's father. His calendar wasn't packed with business meetings or flights anymore. Instead, it had reminders like parent-teacher conference or Jalen's soccer game. And yet, in this slower, quieter version of life, he found more fulfillment than in any corporate milestone. But that peaceful rhythm was tested when he received an email from a producer at a major media outlet. A reporter named Hannah Gregg had attended one of his community talks in Charlotte and was pitching a feature story to her editor. From Millions to Meaning, The Redemption of Ethan Graves. At first, Ethan ignored it. He didn't want cameras or headlines. He'd had that before, and it left him with nothing but regret. But Rachel convinced him to at least meet with Hannah. You don't have to tell the world everything, she said. But if one more person hears your story and it keeps them from making the same mistake, wouldn't it be worth it? Hannah met Ethan at a local diner, dressed in a worn coat and scribbling in a battered notebook. She didn't come with a crew or a microphone, just curiosity. I'm not here to glorify what you used to be, she told him. I'm interested in who you've become. Over coffee and pie, Ethan opened up. He told her about the moment at his wedding when he saw Arya with a rag in her hand and her smile dimmed by exhaustion. He told her about walking away from everything, about living small on purpose, and how he found his real purpose in helping others who were invisible in the world he once ruled. The article was published 2 weeks later, and it struck a nerve across the country. Messages flooded in, some from former colleagues, others from total strangers. One message stood out. It was from a man named Brad Murphy, a venture capitalist Ethan once pitched 2 years ago. I didn't invest in Solis Tech, Brad wrote, but I'd invest in you now. Not to make money. To make a difference. Let's talk. Ethan wrestled with it for days. He wasn't trying to be a symbol. But the idea that someone with money and influence wanted to support mentorship programs, education outreach, and youth development? That felt bigger than ego. It felt like responsibility. Around the same time, Arya began having nightmares. They were small things, waking up crying, clinging to Ethan, saying she dreamt he'd disappeared. You were gone, she'd whisper. And I couldn't find you. He didn't need a therapist to decode that. Somewhere deep down, she still remembered the times he was too busy, too distracted, too absent. The guilt hit him like cold water. No matter how much he changed, those early memories still shaped her. He began adjusting again. Less travel, more bedtime stories. He canceled a weekend conference to take her ice skating downtown. They slipped and fell and laughed until their cheeks hurt. That night, she slept through without a sound. One evening, as he walked home from the center with Jalen and a few other kids, Ethan overheard them talking about dreams. I want to be a music producer, said one. NBA player, said another. When it was Jalen's turn, he hesitated, then looked up at Ethan. I want to be someone who helps people feel seen. Like Mr. Graves. Ethan felt something catch in his throat. He wasn't trying to build a legacy. But somehow, one was forming in the hearts of the kids he showed up for every week. Not long after, Rachel suggested something bold. You should start something, she said. A real nonprofit. You're already doing the work. Make it official. Get funding. Grow it. Ethan hesitated. I'm not sure I'm ready for all that again. Budgets, board meetings, logistics. She smiled. Then let others handle the logistics. You lead the heart. He mulled it over for days. Eventually he filed the paperwork. He called it Second Light, for people who missed their first but never stopped hoping. They held the first official Second Light fundraiser in a repurposed warehouse-turned-art space. There were folding chairs, a few string lights, a modest sound system, and over 100 guests. Former business contacts showed up, along with teachers, parents, local officials, and teens. Jalen opened the evening with a short speech about the power of being believed in. Then Ethan took the mic. We live in a world that measures people by what they have, he said. But I've learned that what we give matters more. Especially what we give to those who expect nothing from us. The applause was thunderous, not for who he had been but for who he had become. Later that night, Ethan tucked Arya into bed. She looked up at him and asked, "Did people like your speech?" He smiled. "I think so." She yawned. "I like it when you're home more." He kissed her forehead and whispered, "Me too." Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. The following spring in Asheville brought a rush of color and warmth that wrapped the town like a soft blanket. Cherry blossoms lined the sidewalks near the community center, and children ran freely in the park across the street, their laughter mixing with the buzz of lawnmowers and bicycles. Ethan walked with Arya, now 6.5, her small hand gripping his as they passed by the local bakery where the smell of fresh bread spilled into the street. These moments had become the rhythm of his life, quiet, genuine, deeply intentional. Yet beneath the calm exterior, new changes were stirring, and a part of him wondered if he was ready for the next chapter. Second Light was growing faster than he anticipated. The fundraiser had opened doors. Local schools reached out, asking him to bring mentorship programs into their classrooms. City officials wanted to collaborate on youth initiatives. Former tech colleagues offered grants and logistical support, while others asked if they could volunteer. What began as a personal mission was slowly becoming a movement, and that both excited and terrified him. He met with Rachel one evening at a cafe near Pack Square. The place had a rustic charm, brick walls, Edison bulbs, the smell of espresso and old books. She stirred her tea and smiled. "You're building something real, Ethan. But at some point you'll have to decide how much of yourself you want to give it." He looked down, quiet. "What if I give it all and still lose something else?" She tilted her head. "Like what?" "Time with Arya. This version of life I've come to love." Rachel nodded slowly. "Then build it in a way that honors your priorities. Let the mission fit your life, not the other way around." Her words sank in. She wasn't just giving advice, she was reminding him of the lesson he'd nearly lost everything to learn. Weeks passed, and with them came an unexpected phone call. A journalist named Evan Monroe from a national podcast series wanted to feature Ethan's story in a multi-part episode. "Not just the success and downfall," Evan said, "but the part where you chose people over profit. That's what our listeners care about." After much deliberation, Ethan agreed, but with one condition: the episode had to include the voices of the kids at Second Light. "It's not my story alone," he said. "It's theirs too." The interview recordings began in a small room at the center. Jalen talked about the first time he met Ethan, saying, "He saw me, not as a project or a problem, as a person." A girl named Lila spoke of how she wanted to be a teacher because of the after-school program. A teen named Marcus, once caught in the court system, shared how Ethan's mentorship helped him avoid dropping out. As Ethan listened to their voices later, played back in raw audio clips, he felt something twist in his chest, a mix of pride, grief, and awe. Not long after, Second Light was awarded a grant by a foundation based in Raleigh, allowing them to hire 2 full-time staff and expand to another center in Durham. Ethan traveled there with Arya for the launch event. She wore her favorite purple dress and clung to his side through most of the ceremony, wide-eyed at the crowd and the cameras. When a woman knelt and asked her, "What does your dad do?" Arya replied simply, "He helps people feel like they matter." Ethan turned away to blink back tears. Of all the titles he'd ever held, none felt more worthy than that. But with growth came pressure. One afternoon, while reviewing expansion plans, Ethan got a call from his old college roommate, Dylan, now a board member of a tech firm in San Francisco. "We're looking for someone with your experience. Not for profit, real innovation. You could help shape the future." Ethan hesitated. "I appreciate it, Dylan, but I've found my place here." "Think about it," Dylan pressed. "They'd pay well. Full autonomy. And you could use the money to fund whatever you want." That night Ethan lay awake, turning the idea over. It wasn't about greed. It was about influence. What if he could multiply his impact? But then he looked over at Arya, sleeping peacefully, and remembered the sterile emptiness of hotel rooms and late-night emails. Influence wasn't worth a single lost bedtime story. The next morning he told Dylan no. Firmly, finally. "My purpose isn't waiting out there anymore. I've already found it." Instead, he poured himself deeper into Second Light. They launched a scholarship program, started a summer camp, partnered with local therapists to support emotional wellness for teens. Arya often tagged along, coloring in the corner while he met with new staff or volunteers. She became part of the heartbeat of the organization not because she had to, but because she wanted to. And her joy reminded everyone why the work mattered. One Saturday, while cleaning up after a community event, Ethan found a thank you card taped to the whiteboard. The handwriting was shaky, the ink smudged. "You saved my life. I don't know how to say thank you, but I'll spend my whole life trying to be someone you'd be proud of." He stood there, holding the card, the voices of dozens of kids echoing in his mind. In a way, he'd been trying to save himself too, and maybe, in helping them, he had. That night, as the last light faded over Asheville and the sounds of crickets filled the air, Ethan sat on the porch with Arya curled up beside him. She was older now, her baby face softening into something more thoughtful, more aware. "Do you think people really change, Daddy?" she asked. He looked out at the darkening sky and thought of all the versions of himself he'd shed to become the man sitting there. "I think the ones who really want to do better, they do," he said. She nodded, satisfied, and laid her head on his arm. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. A late autumn wind swept through the streets of Asheville, carrying with it the scent of damp leaves and wood smoke. Ethan stood by the window of the community center watching the kids play soccer in the lot across the street. Inside, the room was alive with the rustle of papers, voices of volunteers planning a new holiday food drive, and Arya's soft humming as she helped hang up paper snowflakes for the center's winter program. It was becoming their tradition, giving the season a new meaning, one shaped not by gifts or glitter, but by giving and gratitude. Yet this November, a letter arrived that challenged Ethan in ways he hadn't prepared for. It came from a law firm in Chicago. Neatly folded, typed in crisp font, and carrying a name he hadn't heard in years, Laura Westbrook, his ex-wife's attorney. He read it twice before sitting down. The letter was formal, filled with legal phrasing, but its meaning was simple. Laura wanted partial custody of Arya. After years of absence, after missing birthdays, school plays, the scraped knees and whispered fears, she now claimed she was ready to be a mother again. Ethan felt a storm rising inside. Not rage, he had let go of that long ago, but something deeper. A dread tangled with sorrow. Arya didn't even remember her mother's face. To Ethan, that silence from Laura had been the final straw, the wound he had covered up by pouring everything into his daughter. And now, just when things were settling, this. He didn't tell Arya immediately. Instead, he drove to meet Rachel at her studio, a cozy brick building filled with easels and the soft scent of turpentine. She listened quietly as he explained, her brush pausing mid-stroke. "She says she's changed," Ethan said. "She's sober, has a job, a place. She wants to reconnect." Rachel placed the brush down. "Maybe she has changed," she said gently. "But Arya's not a second chance, she's a child. Her stability comes first." That night, Ethan drafted a letter with his lawyer. He wasn't cruel, but he was firm. If Laura wanted to be involved, she would need to start with counseling, supervised visits, and prove consistency. The courts agreed, granting conditional, limited visitation rights. Still, it was a shift that Ethan felt ripple through their peaceful world. The first meeting was awkward. It took place at a small, neutral center in Hendersonville. Arya sat beside Ethan on a soft couch, her fingers nervously twisting the hem of her sweater. Laura entered hesitantly, older than Ethan remembered, but with eyes still carrying the flicker of the girl she once was, hopeful, unsure, and haunted. "Hi, Arya," she said softly, crouching to meet her gaze. Arya looked at her dad, uncertain. Ethan gave a small nod, squeezing her hand. "Hi," Arya replied, her voice barely a whisper. That was it for the first visit. But it was something. Over the next few weeks, the visits continued. Short, quiet, supervised. Arya didn't talk much about them and Ethan didn't pry. He wanted her to feel safe, not pulled in two directions. He focused on his work, planning a new project called Voices Unheard, where kids recorded their own stories, narratives of struggle, hope, and healing. It became a hit. Podcasts featured them. Schools requested more workshops. One of Arya's recordings, where she described her idea of a perfect day, was picked up by a local radio station. "It's when I wake up and my dad is making pancakes," she said in the audio, her voice clear and innocent. "We go to the center, help people, then we read at night and he lets me pick the book." Ethan cried when he heard it broadcast. Laura, to her credit, kept her promise. She showed up. Took parenting classes. Apologized, not for Ethan's sake, but to Arya. Slowly, the little girl began asking questions. Why did she leave? Did she ever send me letters? Did she love me back then? Ethan answered each as truthfully and gently as he could. "She was hurting," he said once. "And when people are hurting, they can't always be what others need." Arya nodded, not fully understanding but sensing the depth of the answer. One weekend, after a long hike up the Blue Ridge trails, Arya turned to Ethan and said, "I think I want to draw a picture for her." He nodded, surprised but calm. That sounds like a beautiful idea. She drew a simple crayon sketch, a rainbow over a house with 3 stick figures holding hands. It's a maybe picture, she explained. Maybe we'll all be okay. Ethan felt his throat tighten. Aria's world was widening, and he had to trust her heart to make room for whatever truth it needed. The holidays came, quieter this year but still warm. Rachel brought over homemade cinnamon rolls. Volunteers gathered around the center's tree, decorating it with handmade ornaments from the kids. Laura dropped off a small gift for Aria, a book with a handwritten note inside. Aria didn't open it until New Year's Day. Ethan watched her read it, lips moving slowly over each word. She didn't say much after, just hugged the book to her chest and went to her room. Later that night, she asked Ethan if he'd help her call Laura. "I just want to say thanks," she said. And so he did. That winter, something subtle shifted. Not just in the custody arrangement or the rhythms of their week, but in Ethan himself. He realized that healing wasn't linear. That sometimes, the person who once caused the most pain could become part of the healing, not because they deserved a second chance, but because love, in its truest form, was about courage. The courage to protect, to forgive, to let go or to let in, whichever was right. As snow fell lightly on the roof of the center, Ethan stood in the doorway, watching Aria help a younger child tie his coat. She had grown, not just in height but in spirit. She had seen the broken parts of life, yet still chose kindness, still chose to reach out. And in that, Ethan saw the greatest lesson he'd ever learned. It wasn't about wealth or redemption. It was about showing up, every single day. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, the soft morning light filtering through the windows of his home in Asheville, casting long shadows across the wood floors. His hands were still trembling from the phone call he had received the night before. Laura, after months of supervised visits, had requested a full custody hearing. Ethan knew this moment would come, but the realization still hit him like a punch to the stomach. His life had become something he never expected. He had been a single parent for so long, the sole caretaker, the one person who had shaped Aria's world, and now Laura wanted to take that away. For the first time in a long while, he felt lost. What was he supposed to do? Aria had been doing well, thriving even, and now everything felt so uncertain. He glanced over at the counter where Aria's schoolwork was stacked in neat piles. His daughter had been excelling in school, her teachers praising her for her maturity, creativity, and leadership in the classroom. Aria had recently written an essay about what family meant to her. It was the kind of piece that made Ethan's heart swell. In her words, family was the people who showed up, the ones who cared enough to be there. She had drawn pictures of their house, the two of them holding hands, and a small figure with a sad face standing outside the door. Ethan had read the essay, his emotions tangled in a way he didn't know how to express. He wanted to protect her from the hurt that was inevitably coming, but he also wanted to make sure she felt loved by both her parents, if that was possible. As Ethan sat there, the weight of the decision pressing down on him, the door creaked open. Aria's small figure appeared in the doorway, her messy hair falling around her face. She looked up at him with her wide eyes, the innocence in them a stark contrast to the storm Ethan felt brewing inside. "Dad, are you okay?" she asked softly. Her voice was always so gentle, so full of concern even at her young age. Ethan forced a smile, trying to hide the anxiety that had settled in his chest. "I'm fine, sweetie. Just thinking," he replied, trying to keep his tone light. Aria tilted her head, looking at him as if she could sense there was more to the story. "Is it about Mommy?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan froze for a moment. He hadn't realized how much she had been picking up on. He had tried so hard to protect her from the tension that had been building between him and Laura, but children had an uncanny way of knowing when something wasn't right. He nodded slowly, not sure what else to say. "Mommy wants to spend more time with you," he said, his voice cracking just a little. Aria's face didn't change. She simply stood there, looking at him with the kind of understanding that only a child could have. "She's been asking about you, Aria," Ethan continued. "She wants to see you more, but we'll have to figure out what's best for you." Aria was silent for a moment, her small fingers playing with the hem of her shirt. Finally she spoke, her voice small but firm. "I don't want to go live with her, Dad. I want to stay with you." The words hit Ethan like a wave. He had never wanted to put her in this position, but here she was making a choice. And in that moment he knew that his biggest responsibility wasn't just protecting her from the past, but also protecting her from the future. That night, as they sat together on the couch, Ethan held Aria close, his arms wrapped around her as they watched a movie. The warmth of her small body next to his brought a sense of peace, but it didn't last. The fear that had been lingering in the back of his mind slowly started to take hold again. What if Laura won the custody battle? What if Arya was forced to live with her mother, in a place that was foreign to her? Ethan had tried his best to raise Arya with love and stability. He had given her everything he had, and now it felt like all of that was at risk. The court hearing was set for the following month, and Ethan spent the days leading up to it in a haze of preparation. He met with his lawyer, gathered evidence of Arya's progress, and worked with the counselor who had been helping them through this difficult transition. He was doing everything he could to make sure Arya remained in a place where she felt safe and loved. But it wasn't easy. The thought of facing Laura in court, of hearing the legal arguments, of possibly losing Arya, weighed heavily on him. In the days before the hearing, Arya grew quieter. She stopped asking about the court date, stopped talking about her hopes and dreams for the future. Instead, she seemed to retreat into herself, spending more time in her room or drawing pictures that she never showed him. Ethan could see the shift and it broke his heart. He wanted to tell her everything would be okay, but he didn't know if he could make that promise. On the morning of the hearing, Ethan and Arya stood in the parking lot outside the courthouse. The cold air made Arya shiver, and Ethan instinctively wrapped his coat around her shoulders. "It's going to be okay, sweetie," he said, his voice softer than he intended. Arya looked up at him, her eyes searching his face for reassurance. "Are you sure, Dad?" she asked. "I don't want to leave you." Ethan bent down to her level, his heart heavy. "I'm sure. Whatever happens, I'm always going to be here for you. No one can change that." Arya nodded, though the uncertainty in her eyes remained. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was tense. Ethan could feel the weight of the proceedings as he sat across from Laura, who was surrounded by her lawyer. Ethan had expected anger, frustration, maybe even resentment, but instead Laura looked tired, defeated, almost. Their eyes met briefly, and for a fleeting moment, Ethan saw a flicker of regret in her gaze. The judge entered and the hearing began. As the lawyer spoke, Ethan tried to focus on the facts. He spoke about Arya's life with him, about her school, her friends, the activities she loved. He emphasized the stability he had given her, the support, and the love. He spoke of the past, but only briefly, only to show that he had always been there, while Laura had not. Laura, for her part, seemed hesitant. She spoke about how she had changed, how she was sober, how she had a steady job now. But her words didn't seem to carry the weight they once had. Ethan didn't want to see it, but he could feel the shift in the room. Arya's needs were front and center now, and it wasn't clear where Laura fit into that picture. The judge took his time, carefully considering the arguments from both sides. When the decision came, Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. The judge ruled that Arya would remain with him, with continued supervised visits for Laura. Ethan let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. It wasn't over, not yet. There would be more visits, more time for healing, but for now he had one. That night, as Arya snuggled next to him on the couch, her small head resting on his shoulder, Ethan realized something. This fight, this struggle, had been about more than just a courtroom battle. It had been about showing up, about being there for the person who needed him most. And as he held Arya close, he knew that no matter what, he would always show up for her. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. Ethan stood at the edge of the park, his eyes following Arya as she ran with abandon across the grass. The evening sun cast long shadows on the ground, the soft hum of the city surrounding him, but for a moment, it felt like the world had slowed down. It was hard to believe that so much had changed in such a short time. Just a few months ago, he had been uncertain about everything. The custody battle had taken him to places he never thought he'd go, challenging him in ways he had never imagined. But standing there, watching Arya laugh and play, Ethan felt a peace that had been so elusive during the previous months. The court decision had been a turning point, but it was far from the end. The aftermath had been messy and complicated, with Arya's relationship with her mother going through a series of ups and downs. Laura had tried in her own way to reconnect with their daughter. She had shown up at some of Arya's school events, offered gifts, and even tried to take her to lunch a few times. But it was clear to everyone that the bond between them wasn't what it once was, and for Arya, it was difficult to navigate the shifting emotions. Arya missed her mother, but the confusion of the past few years lingered, and it seemed like a simple reunion wouldn't be enough to undo the hurt. Ethan had tried to be understanding, offering Arya the space she needed to process her feelings, but it was hard not to feel a sense of protectiveness every time Arya looked at him with those big eyes that carried so much of his own fear and hope. As he watched her play, Ethan thought about the times when he had almost given up. There had been moments when he'd questioned if he was doing the right thing, when the weight of responsibility had felt too heavy. He remembered the sleepless nights, the long hours at work trying to balance everything, the moments when he had thought about stepping away from it all. But now, standing there, he realized how far they had both come. The months of struggle, the days of uncertainty, had led him to this moment, watching his daughter's joy in the simplest things. He had held on for this moment of peace. Arya jogged back over to him, her face flushed with excitement. "Dad, can I go on the swings?" she asked, her voice filled with the kind of enthusiasm that was impossible to ignore. Ethan smiled and nodded, feeling a familiar warmth spread through him as he watched her dash toward the playground. He followed behind, taking a seat on a nearby bench, where he could keep an eye on her but also give her the independence she was so eager to claim. As Arya swung higher, her laughter ringing out in the air, Ethan allowed himself a moment of reflection. The road they had traveled together hadn't been easy, but it had been theirs. And through it all, he had learned so much about himself, about what it meant to be a father, not just in the easy moments but in the ones that tested every ounce of patience, strength, and courage. He had learned that it was okay to ask for help, to lean on friends when things felt impossible. He had learned that love wasn't always about grand gestures, but about showing up, day after day when it mattered most. He remembered the day the court had ruled in his favor. The relief had been overwhelming, but it hadn't been the end. It had only been the beginning of the healing process. There had been phone calls, awkward conversations, and moments when Arya had cried because she didn't understand why things couldn't just go back to the way they were. Ethan had done his best to reassure her, to let her know that it was okay to feel sad, to miss her mom. But he had also reminded her that they were a family, even if it looked different than it had before. They had to redefine what family meant, and in that process they had built a new understanding of love and support. In the months that followed, the bond between Ethan and Arya had only deepened. The shared experiences, the quiet moments spent together, the conversations that had stretched long into the night, these were the things that had created a foundation that nothing could shake. Arya had started to thrive again, finding joy in things she hadn't been able to enjoy in a long time. She had found a group of friends at school, joined the dance team, and had even started to draw again. The creativity that had once been a source of comfort for her had come flooding back, and Ethan had seen her rediscovering herself in ways that filled him with pride. There were still challenges to face, but they no longer felt insurmountable. Ethan had learned to navigate the ups and downs, to take each day as it came, and most importantly, to hold on to the small moments of joy that made life so precious. Arya finished her turn on the swings and ran over to him, her face glowing with excitement. "Can we go get ice cream now?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with that same joy that Ethan had come to treasure. He nodded, and together they walked to the nearby ice cream shop, the simple act of enjoying a treat on a warm afternoon feeling like a small victory in a world that often felt unpredictable. As they sat on the bench outside, sharing a sundae, Ethan couldn't help but smile. Life was still full of unknowns, but in this moment he had everything he needed. He had his daughter and he had her trust. And he knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The future didn't have to be perfect, but as long as they had each other, Ethan believed they could navigate anything. In the distance he could see Laura walking toward them, her steps slow, her face unreadable. Ethan didn't know what the future held for their relationship, but he knew that he had done everything he could to create a stable life for Arya. As she approached, Arya looked up at Ethan, a question in her eyes. Ethan smiled, squeezing her hand. "It's okay," he said softly. "Let's just see what happens." And with that, for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt a sense of peace. No matter what the future held, they had made it this far. And that, he realized, was enough. If you've liked this story, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends.